"The wind is speaking from the well," Jessie whispered in his ear the moment their boots hit the dust of the drive, her small hand squeezing the cuff of his threadbare jacket, as if the earth itself might answer back. Samuel Carter had known plenty of winds. Razor winds that shaved a field to the root, hot winds that smelted corn silk to a brittle curl, but never one that voiced syllables. Not until today. He had signed a caretaker deed 2 days earlier, a county program that handed him a dead farm for free so long as he kept it alive, fix the fences, pay the taxes next year, bring breath back to what had gone quiet. Free, like a stray dog no one else wanted. Free, with a ledger of terms heavier than money. They stepped out together, father and daughter, into a yard abandoned long enough for the grass to forget the shape of human feet. The farmhouse leaned a few degrees toward the northern hedgerow as if listening, clapboard flaking like old paint-stained snow. The porch sagged. Window glass glimmered with the milky cataract of neglect. Even the wind chime, 5 copper tubes and a crushed bottle cap, had rusted into silence, and yet the place felt awake, the way a sleeping animal twitches at the faintest scent. Jessie's breath fogged in the cool morning despite the bright sun. "Hear it?" she murmured. He did. Not sound exactly. A pressure, a hush that pressed back. Beyond the porch, the yard sloped toward a shallow ring of stones half swallowed by pigweed. A well, an old one, capped by a swollen lid of timber and a crossbar for a bucket rope long gone. Samuel's dog Blue nosed toward it, hackles barely raised, tail held like a question mark. The wind pushed across the open acres, over rye gone feral, over fence wires strung like ruined harp strings, and made a language of the weeds. Samuel told himself it was nothing but air and imagination. Then Jessie leaned to his ear again. "Daddy," it said my name. On the drive back from the county office, he'd promised himself he would not spook the girl with his doubts. He'd told her they were starting over, that this place, this Stark County 40 with a tired barn and a patchwork of fields, was where things might finally turn. They'd plant, fix, mend. They'd make a calendar out of chores and slow miracles. They would hear coins again, even if just in the pocket's imagination. Fuel money, feed money, grocery money that didn't require apology at checkout. He was tired of apologies, tired of watching Jessie count the cans in the cupboard like rosary beads. He set a hand to the well's lid. Its wood was furred with moss and soft in patches, the grain rising like small waves beneath his palm. He pressed. The lid stuck, fused by seasons. Somewhere under there, black water, old mud, maybe the bones of a raccoon. The air smelled of iron and the faint sweetness of crushed clover. Blue circled, pawing at a thistle, then sneezed, and looked up with those wheat-colored eyes that had seen too many evictions, too many borrowed nights in rented rooms where every pipe had an opinion. A silence fell so total it felt like a sound. The pause between heartbeats, the blink before a flash. In that precise pause, Jessie's whisper arrived again, softer. It said, come back. The words chilled him in a way no wind could. His late wife used to say the land remembers what we forget. He had laughed then, young and certain. Today, he didn't laugh. He looked at his daughter. Blonde flyaways clung to her cheek. A smudge of graphite stained her thumb from the sketchbook she never let go. She was 10, too young to carry the weight of foreclosure papers and storage lockers and the tired gravity on her father's shoulders. Too young to be the one who heard the land speak first. Maybe it's the rope creaking down there, he offered, too quickly. Or a bird. But there was no rope. No birdsong either. Only the flit of a swallow in the barn's mouth. Its shadow a stitch darting through a torn hem of light. He went to the truck, fetched a pry bar, and came back to the stones. He slid metal into the seam of timber and earth. The bar bit, then levered. Wood groaned, a knot popped like a joint, and the lid came up a little. Cold breath rose from below, damp as a cellar. It smelt faintly of pennies and something older, like wet rope and oak casks. Jessie took 1 step back and then, unprompted, 2 steps forward, chin high. "We should listen," she said. He wanted to say, "We should go slow." He wanted to say, "We should go get help." He wanted to say, "I am listening, kiddo. I have been listening my whole life for the one good thing that whispers back." He lowered the lid gently and straightened, muscles in his back singing their familiar protest. "First, we get the house open. We start with what we can see." He tried a smile. Jessie nodded, serious in the way of children pretending not to be afraid. They turned toward the porch. Somewhere behind them the weeds moved and, If a man were the believing kind, the well exhaled the smallest, saddest word in the language. Home. His name was Samuel Carter. His daughter was Jessie Carter. The names belonged to people who had always dealt in straight lines, fence lines, plow lines, the lifeline between day labor and next week's rent. Now the lines bent, curving around a place that felt like it had been waiting for them, and waiting for its secret to be found. Morning widened across the acreage like a slow spill of milk, softening everything it touched. In the quiet, their footsteps on the porch boards sounded too loud, like talk in a church. Samuel set his shoulder to the swollen front door and leaned until the latch surrendered with the brittle snap of an old bone. Dust met them, honest dust that rose and drifted and made the air visible in gold shafts. The entryway smelled like dry books and cold ashes. A quilt lay folded on a settee as if someone meant to come back after a quick errand and never did. The wallpaper's floral had cracked into maps of continents no one had sailed. It looked like the last breath before forgetting. They took it room by room. In the kitchen, a hand-painted rooster above the sink smiled a chipped smile. A mason jar held a faded bouquet of wheat stalks bound with a ribbon brittle enough to crumble. The pump handle was stiff but not dead. After a dozen strokes, water coughed rusty, then ran clear, shocking cold and alive. Jessie washed her hands and laughed because even small miracles deserve laughter. "Listen," Samuel said then, low and steady, the way he said "let's keep walking" when a storm crawled over the horizon. "I want you to take the front room, open the windows, air it out. I'll see whether the barn is as tired as it looks. We'll make a list. Lists help." She nodded like a solemn clerk and pulled a chair to the stiff sash. Outside, the yard answered with the thin music of insects. Blue lay where the entry met the kitchen, chin on paws, eyes tracking dust sparks as if they were fireflies. Samuel looked at that dog and felt the oddest flicker: gratitude. Blue had been shoved from 3 trucks in his short life, and had found his way back to one pair of boots that never kicked him. Now here they all were, man, child, dog, standing at the lip of a story that had decided to include them. He stepped back onto the porch and scanned the horizon. The fields ran in long, yellowing panels interrupted by a fence line stitched with cedar posts and a gate hanging by one hinge. The barn, big gabled, red once, had scabs of paint and a roof that pinched and bulged like a bad hat. Past it, the hedgerow rose, a dark seam hiding birds and the occasional deer. Farther still, a dirt road stitched away toward town. He could put it all in his pocket like a crumpled receipt. This was his now. Free, the clerk had said, sliding paper across metal. Free with conditions and an inspection at year's end. Free if the weather does not forget you. He would not let it. As he crossed the yard, the well stayed in his peripheral vision the way an unwelcome memory does, present even when you look elsewhere. He told himself the whisper had been nothing. Or if it had been something, it belonged to an old wind that had learned to make trouble. He palmed the barn door. It rasped over hard-packed earth, disgorging the smell of hay long surrendered to mold. Swallows fretted and arced near the rafters. Sun fell through split boards and bright ladders. In a far stall stood a workbench with a busted vise and a coffee can of bent nails. A calendar on a beam still said May, the year sun faded to a ghost. He found a coil of rope that might still hold his weight, a square-bladed shovel, a hand auger, a level with its bubble trapped like a fly. He made a mental list. Patch roof, hang new gate, humble the weeds. You start where you stand. He set the tools by the door and listened. The land was thinking. It had the sound of a long exhale. "If you're watching this," Samuel would say later into the lens, "consider this your sign to believe in small beginnings." Folks were starting over on a place that should have been scrap. If you've ever felt written off, if your cupboard rang like a church bell every time you reached into its thin air, then you know what it means to turn a key in a lock that doesn't yet love you. Stick with us. Subscribe. Tell us where you're watching from. County, state, country. Tell us the last time you saw a miracle no one else noticed. We'll show you what we find, the good and the not so good, and we'll do it in plain talk. Because out here the wind is a straight shooter, even when it whispers. And maybe you've got a well of your own that's been trying to get your attention. He imagined saying that, not as salesmanship, but as a way to hold himself accountable. Meanwhile, work. He rehung the barn door with a wedge and a prayer, then walked the fence line, shoulders and hips measuring distance in an old, familiar rhythm. On the north edge, he found a cedar post carved with a name half-eaten by time. He brushed away lichen with his sleeve. And then nothing. He thought of the well, the whisper. He thought of the way some names persist like seeds in dry ground, waiting an entire decade for one crack of rain. When he came back, the house breathed easier. Windows stood open like mouths after a hard run. Jessie had found a broom. The front room held neat islands of dust. She was a worker, his kid. She had her mother's efficient hands and her father's habit of talking to problems as if they might listen. "I made the bedroom livable," she announced. "There's a quilt that doesn't smell like mice." She hesitated. "But the well—" "I know," he said. After lunch, they ate on the porch. Peanut butter on white bread and 2 apples that had wanted to be better apples, and water from the kitchen pump in jelly jars. The sun tilted. The shadows of the porch balusters crawled across the steps like slow ladders. Somewhere a tractor backfired 2 farms over. The air tasted like hot sawdust and the memory of rain. Then the wind rose again and braided itself through the yard. It touched the chimes and found one stubborn note. The thistle near the well bowed. Blue lifted his head. Jessie's gaze moved to the ring of stones. "It's calling again," she said, and the words were steady, not frightened at all. He set the jar down and stood. Some doors you open because you must. Before they crossed the yard, a truck's growl clipped the quiet. Tires on gravel. A plume of dust marching like an army down the county road. Samuel shaded his eyes and watched the pickup turn into the drive without the courtesy of a pause. A man sat high in the cab, mirrored lenses silvering his face like fish scales. The truck rolled to a stop as if it had the deed. The engine clicked after the key cut. The man swung out slow, dust taking its time to settle around his boots. "Afternoon," the stranger said, voice smooth as an oil rag. "Name's Richard Collins. I manage a few holdings out this way." He smiled like a measurement. Heard someone drew the short straw in the old Stark place. Samuel wiped his palm on his jeans and did not offer it. "We don't much believe in short straws," he said. Richard's gaze slipped toward the well, then back. "No? Then maybe you believe in opportunities." The wind suddenly had nothing to say. They stood in a tilted triangle. Man, and the space between them where the county had inked a promise for $0 and a signature. Richard's smile didn't move. The muscles around it did. The way a dog sometimes smiles when showing you which teeth it intends to use. He wore a ranch coat that had never met a fence staple, and boots that looked like they'd only grazed office carpet. "I'm here to make a neighborly introduction," he said, and said it the way some folks say foreclosure, "and to advise caution. This farm bites." "Good to know," Samuel answered, voice even. "I'll keep my hand out of its mouth." Jessie had come to stand beside him. Blue placed himself between her knees and the visitor as if drawn there by a magnet. Richard glanced down and sneered in a way he probably believed looked like kindness. "Dogs love to chase what they can't understand," he said. "Wells. Badger holes. Old business." The phrase clinked like a coin. Old business. "We were about to inspect that old business," Samuel said. "You're welcome to keep driving." Richard's lenses mirrored the farmhouse, the yard, the ring of stones, the 2 small figures reflected like ghosts in a pond. "I used to lease these acres for hay," he said, "back when the previous owner kept his head above water. Funny thing about water, it remembers." He jingled the keys in his palm. "Sometimes it brings things up." Jessie spoke before Samuel could. "The wind said, 'Come back,'" she announced as if filing a report. For the first time, a line in Richard's jaw jumped. "Kids hear what they want," he said. "Adults hear what they fear." Then he pivoted as if the ground itself were on his side. "Look, Mr. Carter," Samuel said. "Samuel Carter. This is my daughter, Jessie." He didn't add anything about their thin pantry, or the way a free farm had felt like a door thrown open in a burning house. He didn't talk about the nights he counted and recounted until the numbers stopped adding to anything but more counting. He just let his name sit there, a stone in the road, names selected from your list. "Mr. Carter," Richard continued, "I represent investors who don't like surprises. This parcel sits over a vein of limestone and a complicated water table. Sinkholes happen, unmarked hazards, old wells, sometimes cisterns, sometimes worse. If you plan to dig, you should call me first. I have maps, I have expertise, I have solutions." He smiled that measurement again. "I can solve problems you don't know you have." Samuel felt the wind brush his ears like an old friend trying to warn him without making a scene. "We'll manage," he said. Richard's gaze cooled. "Do you know who to call if you find metal?" he asked. "Or documents? Or anything that smells like history? Law says you report it, but law can be flexible when a man is tired and the month is longer than his money." Don't be that man. He pointed once with his chin toward the well. Especially not with that in your yard. He left in a churn of gravel that freckled the lower panels of the truck with tiny bright scars. The dust took longer to go than he had. They stood in it, father and daughter and dog, like figures in snow globe ash. He's a bully, Jesse said. The word fit too well. Samuel looked at the well, then at the road, and decided he would not be the man who put off the first necessary thing because a stranger tried to rename it. He fetched the pry bar again and worked the lid until it seated like an old argument. When it came free, it revealed a black circle that felt deeper than the hole itself. Cool air rose, slick on skin, carrying the quietest clink, the unmistakable sound of water touching metal. Blue stretched to sniff, ears forward. Back, Samuel said softly, easing the dog with one hand. He found 2 fence posts and made a makeshift crosspiece to keep Jesse from leaning too far. Then he lowered a rock tied to twine, listening for the splash. He counted the seconds aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, splash. Not deep then, or deeper than it sounded. Smells like pennies, Jesse said. She was right. Under the pennies, something else. The tannic bite of oak, like the ghost of a barrel. He swept the beam of a flashlight down the shaft, finding stones grouted with clay and hairline roots like a fine web. At 6 feet, a shadow insisted on being more than shadow. He narrowed the beam. There, beneath the waterline, something angular. Wood? A small chest? A crate? He felt the clack of his pulse in his gums. They rigged the rope to the crossbar and tied Samuel's waist. A belt and iron sort of plan. He didn't intend to climb in, only to drop a grappling hook he'd fashioned from a hayrake tooth and see if he could snag the thing. He swung the hook, let it fall, and it struck with a sound that did not belong in water. A hollow thunk from a sealed edge. He swallowed. Feels like a box, he said. The breeze freshened and cooled the sweat at his temples. From the road came nothing. From the hedgerow came a ripple as something small, fox, slipped through. From the house came the slow tick of a kitchen clock that had no right to be ticking and yet was, as if the place had decided to keep time for them. He pulled the rope hand over hand and felt weight that didn't rise easily. The stubborn weight of a thing that had made up its mind to stay hidden. Blue whined low. Jessie set her hands on the rope too, small palms pinking. The hook took. The weight shifted. Mud belched. Water frothed like a mouth trying to speak. Then a corner breached, dark and slick with a corner banded in metal. A crate, olive drab paint under the slime. Letters ghosted the side in stencil. U.S. something. Ordnance. His stomach went cold and bright. Okay, he said. Okay. They wrestled it onto the rimstone by brute will and bad leverage, then together slid it onto the grass. It lay there like a secret that had quit. The metal bands were not rusted through. The padlock looked military and absurdly confident. Jessie touched one letter carefully, as if she might burn her finger. What if it's dangerous? She asked. He had thought the word already. He said a different one. Careful, he answered, and went to the barn for the bolt cutters with the cleanest bite. When the lock snapped, the sound was indecently loud, like a laugh in a funeral parlor. He lifted the lid. The smell that came out was old oil and paper and the stubborn sweetness of preserved wood. Inside, stacked tubes of metal wrapped in waxed cloth, a ledger bound in canvas, 3 tins stenciled with numbers that meant nothing to him, and beneath those, the corner of another box, smaller, a label, property of U.S. Army Signal Corps. Beneath it, a handwritten tag in fountain pen ink, Harper, the name from the cedar post. He touched the canvas ledger with 2 fingers, reverent without meaning to be. The paper inside rasped. The entries looked like coordinates and names and in places deposits and withdrawals that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with equipment. Radios, batteries, fuel. Jessie inhaled, then whispered, Daddy, is this bad? He didn't know yet. He knew only that this farm had just told them a story inside a story, and that Richard Collins had smelled it on the wind. He slid the lid back down and set his palms on the crate as if it might stand up and run. Then he felt it. Not the wind this time, but a pressure underfoot. A hollow vibration deep enough to be mistaken for a trick of nerves. He bent, pressed his ear to the grass, and heard a sound like a sigh moving through timber. The well? No. The ground beyond, where the hedgerow thickened, where the fence line ran bent as an old man's spine. Something was buried there that made sound when the wind rose. something bigger than a crate. He stood, careful not to telegraph that care to his child. "We put this in the house," he said. "We call someone we can trust." He thought of the county clerk who had slid across the deed with a kind smile and clean nails. Elizabeth Lizzie Moore, her name tag bright as a coin. He'd liked the way she asked Jesse about school as if school were still a real thing for them. He'd liked the way she said, "Don't let the older men claim they know everything. The land prefers listeners." He'd believed her by accident. Name selected from your list. They carried the crate to the porch together, Blue walking a body's width from the well as if something down there had pressed a cold nose to his ribs. When they reached the door, Jesse's attention snagged on the threshold. A nailhead was polished brighter than its neighbors, the way metal gets when touched more than it should be. She squatted. "Look," she said. The nail had no slot. It was a plug. She worried it with a butter knife from the kitchen and popped it free to reveal a small hole bored into the jamb. Inside, wrapped in wax paper brittle as onion skin, a brass key and a folded scrap of paper with a penciled word, cellar. Samuel met Jesse's gaze and tried to keep his voice light. "Well," he said, "I guess the house wants to be heard too." The brass key fits the cellar lock like a secret recognizing its owner. It turns with a tired click, and the door exhales a draft cool as Riverstone. The stairs descend at a pitch that tests knees and nerve, treads dusted in talc-fine powder that blooms under each step. Samuel holds the flashlight. Jesse holds the rail and counts softly, as if numbers could keep them steady. Blue stays at the threshold, toes at the lip, tail stiff, letting out one low breath of a warning, and then another. The air down here smells like damp cedar, mouse country, and a faint medicinal sweetness that doesn't belong to the present. At the landing, the beam finds a wall of shelves. Jars glint with ancient peaches gone to amber shadows. Cardboard boxes slump. A workbench waits with the patience of things built to outlast men. And there, half hidden behind a pegboard panel, a rectangle of darkness where no darkness should be. Samuel touches the pegboard. It shifts. He finds finger-worn edges and lifts. Behind it, a door of sheet steel painted the color of a bruise. The brass key in his palm warms, as if remembering its work. It slips into a second lock, bites, and the door gives with a layered moan. The room beyond is small, rectangular, and purposeful. Cable runs hug the walls. A crank-field radio lives under a canvas shroud. A pair of headphones, ear cups cracked with age, hang from a hook like sleeping bats. On a table sits a wooden file drawer labeled in fountain pen ink, Harper. Samuel swallows and feels the well whisper again in the nerves of his wrists. He opens the drawer. Inside, logbooks that smell of oil and rain, pages scored with neat pencil lines, dates, call signs, coordinates, notes clipped short and hard. Tucked under a ledger, ration books, a folded map of the county annotated with tiny red X's, and, in a manila envelope, a photograph of a crew in uniform standing beside a Quonset hut, with a hand-painted sign that reads, Signal Det, 214, Home Front Watch. Jesse's finger hovers above the faces. Which one is Harper? Samuel points to a man with narrow shoulders and a steady stare, a grease smudge on his cheekbone like war paint. On the back of the photo, in tidy script, E. Harper, Chief Operator. No first name, just a letter as if the rest had been understood. Under the photograph lies a second envelope, its flap unglued by time. Inside, a deed from 1946, an addendum drawn up by a lawyer whose stamp has gone green at the edges. It grants right-of-way to the U.S. Army Signal Corps for a buried conduit and temporary storage of equipment essential to the war effort, to be surrendered back to the lawful owner of record upon written notice. The signature at the bottom is Harper, the same hand as the photograph. The wind above lifts and sets the house, a faint creak like a ship easing in its berth. Jessie stands very still. So the well wasn't just a well, she says. It's talking through the old pipes. Samuel tilts his head. Somewhere beyond the cellar wall, a low rush answers, air drawing through a vent or a duct. The map shows a dotted line from the house to the hedgerow, where the X's gather in a scattershot constellation. The hedgerow turns the wind into a murmuring instrument. The well sits on that line like a crooked tooth. When they come up for air, midday is already slanting toward heat. Samuel calls the county office from the porch, asks for Lizzie Moore, and tells the truth in a sparse, careful summary. A war-era cache, A ledger. A conduit. You did right, Lizzie says. Her voice is clear and practical. A person who balances kindness with form. Chain of custody matters. Don't let anyone remove anything. I'll drive out with a deputy to document, file the discovery, and make sure you get credited as the lawful finders on your property. The program doesn't strip you of rights, it makes you stewards. She pauses. Has anyone else been by? Samuel looks at the road without meaning to. A man named Richard Collins, he says. Said he manages holdings. Said wells carry old business. On the other end, a breath. Collins, Lizzie repeats, as if noting a cloud bank. He's been sniffing around a county bid for a water project. There are rumors about a private line. If he returns, call me. Don't argue law at your gate. Pressure arrives before the call ends. A white SUV noses into the drive. Light bar dark, county insignia on the door. A woman in a khaki shirt steps out, clipboard in hand, a badge on her belt. Code enforcement. Afternoon, she says, professional but tight. We received an anonymous complaint about an unprotected well. I need to post a hazard notice and inspect for immediate risks. Samuel counts to 3 in his teeth. We have the lid secured and a crossbar, he says. We also reported a historical find. The clerk is on her way. The officer softens a hair. Then I'll make it fast. She tests the distance between stones with a tape, notes the state of the lid, scribbles. You'll need a proper cap within 72 hours, she says. That's the rule. If this turns into a historic site, we coordinate. But safety doesn't wait for history. She glances at the hedgerow. There's a hollow sound back there. You aware? We are, Samuel says. We plan to tread lightly. She tacks a yellow notice to the porch post and leaves as neutrally as she came. Her tailpipe chatter fades, and the yard seems to lean back into itself. Jessie looks up at him. He's sending people to scare us, she says. Samuel nods once. Maybe, but rules aren't the enemy. Panic is. He grabs a scrap of plywood and a box of screws, reinforces the lid with a real cross brace, then sets orange flagging around the stones like cheap festival bunting. It's not handsome, but it's lawful, and sometimes the difference between getting to keep what you love and watching it be taken is the way you honor dull requirements in the face of bright drama. They return to the cellar to catalog what they can before official eyes arrive. The ledger mentions beacon checks and midnight transmissions about weather and river height. It mentions collateral transfers, radios traded to farmers for storage and fuel scrip returned. It notes a final entry, conduit sealed 748. After that, silence. On the workbench, a tin holds spare parts, wax paper packets of crystals, a stamp pad whose ink has fossilized. Jessie tries the crank on the radio. Its gears chatter, not dead yet. A low hum pours from the speaker like a memory. For one breath, they hear a faint tone, then nothing, like a story remembering how it ends. Outside, a truck engine idles, then dies. Boots on dirt, voices low, then pretending to be louder than they are. Richard Collins returns, this time with 2 men in canvas jackets and a roll of surveyor's tape. He doesn't bother with hello. Heard you called in reinforcements, he says. That complicates matters. His gaze goes to the yellow notice. Fine, we'll do this by the book. Your book or the county's? Samuel asks. An edge he didn't intend. Richard's smile thins. Everything I do is legal, he says, which is the sort of sentence that makes a dog stand up. Blue stands. The 2 men fan out, eyes on the hedgerow. One carries a probe rod and stabs the ground with the intimacy of a thief picking pockets. He finds hollow quickly. Thunk, 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 then marks a grid with orange paint. There, he calls. Pipe or void. Private right-of-way, Richard says as if chanting the future into being. Existing infrastructure neglected by the prior owner requires maintenance. I can have a crew here by dark. Samuel places himself between the men and the ring of stones. You don't set a boot past this well, he says, voice quiet. And you don't touch the hedgerow. Richard leans forward until his mirrored lenses hold Samuel's face like a fly in amber. You don't know what's under you, he says. You think this is about antique radios and folksy ghosts. It isn't. It's about water. It's always about water. The statement hangs, heavy and true. Water is the first fact and the last. The wind presses an answer through the hedgerow. The well breathes cold at their ankles. Jessie's hand finds Samuel's sleeve. He can feel her pulse through denim. He can hear his own in his throat. Then gravel crunches. A blue sedan hurries up, and Lizzie steps out. hair braided out of the wind, a deputy behind her. "This property is under lawful stewardship," she says, all calm spine. "Any private maintenance requires recorded easements on file. Mr. Collins, do you have a current permit for excavation?" Richard tilts his head. "Do you have a warrant to impede a property manager?" She smiles without showing a tooth. "I have a badge and a camera." The deputy lifts his phone and begins to record. The men with the probe rod look suddenly like boys who have wandered into a funeral. Richard holsters his smile. "We'll be back," he says. With paper. He backsteps, reconsidering even the ground he's already trod, and leaves the grid of orange marks like a promise and a threat. The wind picks up and threads the hedgerow. The sound that comes is not a whisper now, but a long, low organ note, a hollow resonance that carries through bone. The dotted line on the map runs there. The old conduit is breathing again. "Something's open," Jessie says. Lizzie studies the map, then the yard. "If there's a buried access," she says, "we need to find it before your neighbor does, and we need to keep you safe while we do." The deputy sweeps the hedgerow with cautious feet. His toe finds corrugation under loam. He kneels, brushes back roots, and reveals the edge of a rusted hatch disguised as dirt. A handle sleeps in a shallow. Samuel's breath shortens without permission. The wind combs the leaves and gives the hatch a faint, hollow rattle. Old business, calling itself by its right name at last. They wait for dusk because sometimes the land tells you when to move. At full sun, everything shows too much. At night, everything hides too well. Dusk splits the difference, laying the world in honest half-shadows. Lizzie switches the deputy with a night shift colleague so there will be a car at the road and eyes if anyone returns with paper or with muscle. She radios the sheriff, who promises a quick warrant to secure a potential hazardous site until the state historical office weighs in. Promises, out here, travel at the speed of necessity. Still, paper takes the long road. Samuel kneels by the hatch with a pry bar and a length of 2x4 for leverage. Jessie crouches beside him with the flashlight and a mouthful of courage. Blue paces a figure 8, never letting their bodies drift out of his orbit. The hatch's bolts have rusted into suggestion, but the hinge pins still remember their purpose. He asks the 2x4 to be a persuasive tongue. Metal groans, spalls, complains. Then the seal breaks with a sigh that smells of old cold, diesel, wet earth, and the varnish tang of oiled wood. A stairwell yawns downward, narrow and close. Air rises that is 50 years behind the day. They descend one at a time, careful. The flashlight licks concrete walls. The steps end in a corridor ribbed with corrugated steel, a tunnel angling toward the house. Cable brackets trace the ceiling like vertebrae. On the left, a room opens, small, bunker-tight, holding wooden crates stamped with dates and codes, a rack for canteens, a table with a grease pencil still stuttering a parabola across a laminated map. On the right, another room houses a pressure tank, a manifold of pipes, and a hand-lettered sign, "To reservoir." The pipes hum under the touch like sleeping animal flank. "Home front water," Jessie whispers. "They built a cistern." Samuel traces one line with his fingers. Galvanized pipe old enough to vote twice in every election. A newer pipe, PVC, white and smug, splices in with blue glue, then disappears north beneath the hedgerow. The joint is not original. It is not careful. It belongs to a man in a hurry who believes the future will forgive his shortcuts. He follows it with the beam. At its base, a trickle beads and falls. The smell that rides the drip isn't clean. On the floor, an orange spray-painted arrow points toward the pipe's exit, the same hue the probe man used. Collins has been here. Maybe last year. Maybe last week. Above, an engine. Low gear. Gravel yielding. Then another engine. Broader. With the diesel clatter of something that arrives to stay. Samuel kills the flashlight. In the dark, their breaths braid. He can hear Jessie counting without sound, the tiny hitch her numbers make when she's afraid. He can hear Blue's nails click once, then still the dog's discipline tightening around instinct. Outside, voices align. Richard's voice lifts on the professional notes of someone who has brought paper. Another voice answers, neutral. More doors, more feet. A generator coughs, then catches. Light bleeds under the hatch seam like milk under a door. Samuel leans to Jessie's ear. "We're not trapped," he whispers. "We're positioned." He feels her nod. He finds the pressure tanks shut off and turns. Water complains in the pipes. Somewhere below them, in whatever they called the reservoir, a bubble of air migrates and kisses iron. He thinks about the radio upstairs, the ledger, The way Harper marked X's like breadcrumbs for the patient. He thinks about water again, the first fact and the last, and how thieves always mistake it for a thing rather than a word. Boots on the hatch, a crowbar pinging against the ring. Lizzie's voice now elevated. You do not have a warrant to enter a private underground structure on a property held in stewardship. Step away from that hatch. Richard's reply. There's an active leak into the water table. Immediate mitigation takes precedence. Paper flutters. Tone hardens. The generator deepens its throat. The hatch shivers. The first hinge pin climbs a fraction, then stalls. Whoever is working up there is strong, but the hinge is older than their impatience. Samuel finds a wooden crate marked signal and sets it beneath the hatch like a choke. Then he takes the canvas from the crank radio they carried down and slings the strap across his shoulder. Jess, he says, you remember how you counted for the well? Count again, but count time for the dog. She understands without explanation. Blue, she breathes, and points to a dark corner under the stairs. Blue slides into shadow like ink in water. Samuel stands where the hatch will open, and when it does, he intends to be ordinary. A man with empty hands and his weight where it belongs. The hatch lurches up on an inch of light and a hard shove. Richard's face appears, lit from below, eyes invisible behind his mirrored lenses. For a beat, he doesn't see Samuel because what bullies expect most is emptiness. Then he flinches. You can't be down there, he says, voice tight with the surprise of being contradicted by matter. There's a safety hazard. We're addressing it, Samuel answers, kind on purpose. With the county. Lizzie's silhouette angles into view. She takes a photo with a phone that clicks like a tiny guillotine. Close the hatch, she instructs Richard. Or step back. Richard chooses neither. He climbs down. Behind him, his two men crowd the opening, boots scraping rust, shoulders hungry. The generator hum swells as if it, too, desires a conclusion. Jesse backs toward the manifold, keeping the beam low. Blue holds behind a crate, head low, eyes lit coals. This is interference, Richard says. A lawyer's word. This is trespass, Samuel answers. A farmer's. You don't have rights under my roof unless I grant them. Two things happen together. Outside, the diesel truck eases closer to the hedgerow, weight pressing the soft flank of ground Collins himself marked as hollow. Under them, the newer PVC elbow coughs a bead of brown, then a string. Jesse's beam catches the drip and follows it to a thin fracture in the glue joint. The joint creaks, unwinds, then parts with a wet pop. Water shoots, a thin, high stream arcing across the room and peppering the generator's extension cord snaked through the hatch lip. The cord jerks, hisses, and dies. The bunker plunges into a dimness lit only by the flashlight's ghost. Back, Richard barks to his men, then forgets to do the same. He lunges for the pipe, palm skidding across algae-slick PVC, and slips. Samuel grabs his jacket and keeps him from smashing his teeth on the manifold. You'll break your neck and it won't help you in court, he says, voice flat. Above, a sound like a sigh grows and keeps growing. The ground at a breaking point finally deciding to break. The diesel shifts its weight 1 inch too far. The hedgerow exhales soil. The truck's rear wheel drops into a sinkhole opened by years of illegal siphon undermining. It sinks with the slow inevitability of a decision delayed past its deadline. The men at the hatch panic. Paper goes sloppy when the ground says no. One scrambles up and out. The other freezes, then chooses the wrong direction and stumbles into the dark room where crates live. Blue explodes from shadow at the sound. Not to bite, but to occupy the space between a frightened man and a worse mistake. A growl like a warning line draws in the air. The man corrects course and climbs. Outside, a voice on a radio multiplies into more voices. The deputy calls in the collapse. The sheriff's truck answers. Gravel spits as vehicles reposition to sound ground. Richard glares at Samuel as if the laws of physics are a personal betrayal. You did this, he says, water streaking his cheek. I didn't glue that joint, Samuel replies. And I didn't park that truck where the map says don't. He kneels at the manifold and clamps the spurting line with a vice grip. The stream calms to a sullen drip. Jesse shoves a bucket under it with the unhurried competence of a child raised on leaks. We'll hold it, she says, and does. Up top, the sheriff's voice carries authority that needs no show. Step back, Mr. Collins. You are not authorized to operate equipment on this property. You are further not authorized to access an underground structure with potential historical value and active safety risks. Hands where I can see them. Paper arrives in the form of a temporary restraining order. Quick ink, Immediate effect. Lizzie reads it into her phone and into the wind. Someone photographs the PVC joint with the county date stamp in frame. Someone else photographs the truck slipping toward the hole, rear tire spinning and then giving up. The ground seals its argument with a shrug. No one is hurt. The truck is stuck. The message is delivered in the oldest language: weight and consequence. Inside the bunker, the air feels cleaner, as if the right door has been opened at last. Samuel breathes and understands the word steward the way the county meant it. Not owner, not conqueror. A person with hands and a promise. He looks at Jessie and almost laughs with the shock of relief. She is steady. Blue sits, chest heaving, eyes on his people. Above, Lizzie kneels and calls down, voice softer now. "You all right?" "We're good," Samuel says. "We found the illegal tie-in. We're holding it with chewing gum and hope." "Hold a little longer," she says. "Help's here." Morning returns with the practical light that makes messy nights make sense. The sheriff's report blooms into an official record. Unauthorized access by a private party, evidence of an unpermitted connection from a historic conduit into a private line, a ground collapse consistent with long-term undermining. Photographs stack, measurements quantify. The State Historical Office ropes the hedgerow with polite tape and calls the conduit eligible pending documentation. The County Water Board, alerted by Lizzie's insistence and the sheriff's blunt summary, opens an investigation into any lines tied to Collins's holdings. Passive verbs fall away, names attached to actions. Richard doesn't return that day. His truck is extracted by a tow with a cable thick as a wrist, and the sinkhole is mapped and cribbed. Paper arrives on his behalf, motions and letters, the bureaucratic thicket that grows when men try to convert pressure into process. But the photograph of the illegal joint does what photographs do. It tells the part of the truth that sinks arguments. The board issues a cease and desist on excavation. The court grants a protective order over the site until the artifacts can be cataloged. When Richard finally appears, it is in a courtroom with air conditioning too cold, and a judge who asks short questions that require shorter answers. He doesn't bring his smile. He leaves without his leverage. Samuel signs papers that use phrases like temporary custodial responsibility and finder's credit. The ledger and the crate are documented, logged, and then returned to a locked cabinet in the farmhouse pending transfer to the county museum, which, it turns out, has a grant for exactly this sort of discovery. The grant includes a stipend for on-site preservation and a modest payment to the property stewards for their cooperation, funded by a historical society endowment with a name no one pronounces the same way twice. It's not a lottery ticket. It is better. It is legitimacy, the kind that pays for a new well cap, a roof patch, and a stack of lumber without the cashier scanning each board as if it were a confession. The conduit is inspected, isolated from the aquifer, and sealed at the old manifold with a proper end stop. The reservoir, when they open it under the supervision of a state hydrologist and a veteran with a cap that says Signal Corps, holds only rainwater and memory. No harm has been done that cannot be undone, the hydrologist says, and there is mercy in that passive construction. Harper's photo, cleaned and framed, finds a place in the county museum with a placard that mentions the Carter family and the stubborn loyalty of a dog named Blue. The war becomes a little less vague and a little more local. School kids will stand in front of that glass and see their county stitched to the world. On the porch one evening, Samuel counts what the day has paid. The new cap on the well sits like a good word. The hedgerow still breathes, but what it says now sounds like a sigh of relief. The wind is just wind again, though sometimes it carries a phrase if you're listening. Jessie leans into his side with that worryless weight children give to people they trust. Blue snores, worn out from doing what dogs do, holding a line with his body until something truer arrives. Bills remain. Work remains. The barn still has a roof, like a question. But the property is theirs to keep if they do the slow, uncinematic work of keeping it. Lizzie drops by with a folder of dates circled in red, inspection deadlines, paperwork windows, a schedule that maps survival to a calendar instead of luck. She sets down a pie someone at the office sent for the girl who listened. Before she leaves, she stands at the well and listens too, hands in her back pockets, eyes narrow against the sunset. "You were right to hear it," she tells Jessie. Most folks don't. Word gets around the county the way word does. A neighbor brings over a second-hand gate and a morning's worth of help to hang it. An old man stops by with a story about Harper showing him how to fix a radio with tinfoil and patience. Two kids on bikes ask if the place is haunted, and Jessie tells them it is, but kindly. The farmhouse learns their footsteps and stops flinching at their voices. The kitchen pump runs clean and loyal. There's laughter at the table again, the sort that doesn't cost extra. As for Richard Collins, the board's investigation tugs a thread that unravels more thread. Fines happen. Permits get revoked. An assistant who knows where the files are buried decides he prefers the law to the company line. In the end, it isn't a movie ending. It's a ledger. Columns corrected, numbers squared. He isn't ruined, just reduced. He stops driving this road for a long while. One last thing returns what was borrowed. In the cellar, taped to the underside of the workbench drawer, a yellowed envelope hides where only those who tidy would find it. Inside, a savings certificate in Harper's name made out to lawful holder of record, Cedar Line Farm, never redeemed, compounded by a small miracle of bureaucratic persistence. The bank verifies. The amount isn't spectacular, but it is more than enough to pay the first year's taxes in a single clean stroke. Samuel takes Jessie with him to deposit it, so she can feel what it's like to hand the teller a paper the world still honors. When they step back out into the afternoon, they both stand taller by an inch that has nothing to do with height. That night, the wind lifts from the west and brushes the well cap. No words, just the hush of leaves clapping once, like a blessing. Samuel looks at his daughter and thinks about the first whisper, the way the land asked them to come back. They did. They stayed. They listened. And when the time came, they answered. If you've been with us through this whole story, if you felt the boards under your feet and the cold on your skin, stick around. We're making a life here, slow and stubborn. Tap subscribe, tell us where you're watching from, and then watch this next video where we fix the barn door with nothing but a hinge, a shim, and a little borrowed luck. Out here, the wind is honest. The work is too. And sometimes when you listen hard enough, a place tells you exactly how to belong.